Hi, so I bought an MPC. If you've been keeping up with my recent videos, this is actually the reason that I sold my MC303, the Roland Groovebox. Because even though I liked the MC303, there were a couple of things that it couldn't do that well that I felt that one of these Akai MPCs would do better. One of them was the sequencing functionality on the MC303 was really hard to use, and MPCs are sort of known for having really easy to use, good interfaces. The other thing was as I actually end up using these mostly for drums. I used the MC303 for other stuff, but I think what I want to be using these mostly for is drums. The velocity sensitive drum pads on the MPC just made more sense. And finally, obviously, the MC303, you can't sample your own sounds into it, whereas with an MPC you can. As I mostly use samples when I'm making electronic music, it made more sense that if I was going to have a hardware groovebox, I should get one that can do sampling as well. So these normally go for about 200 quid, sometimes a bit more if they've got upgrades. But on Facebook Marketplace, someone was selling this one for 150. So I jumped on that pretty quickly because I thought that was a pretty good deal. Unfortunately, when it arrived, one of the cursor keys didn't work and it's stuck on full volume, so the volume control doesn't seem to work. I contacted the bloke who sold it me because he'd said it was all in working order, and I said to him, I don't want to send it back because I think I know how to fix this, but sort of, just let him know that it wasn't in the condition that he'd sent it me, and he was really good about it. He refunded the cost of the parts and the shipping of the parts. I think that was fairly fair in the end. So this video is just me trying to fix those two issues. The parts have arrived, so I've just got to desolder the broken ones and put in these new parts. So I'd opened up the MPC and the first thing I noticed was the knob I'd ordered, though it was the right PCB footprint, it was quite a lot taller than the one that is originally on the MPC. But I figured I could probably snip it so it was short enough, or I could just use a different D-shaft knob that doesn't have the skirt, so it doesn't matter if it sticks up slightly. If anything, it's quite nice to have the volume slightly raised from the record knob, so I thought that was fine. So the first thing I needed to do was get these two control boards loose, and they've got these little jumper cables that attach them to the main PCBs in the back that are really hard to get off. I tried a few things. I tried using some screwdrivers. In the end, I had to use a knife to carefully just get them slightly open, and then a screwdriver to just lever the rest of it off. They're a bit tricky, but as long as you're careful with them, I think it's fine to use something like this to just lever them off. Just make sure you don't push too hard on them. I followed a YouTube video by MPC Stuff for how to unscrew all the screws and get the top off the MPC, so I'll link that in the description. Once you've got the jumpers out, you just unscrew the two screws holding the board down, 4 in the case of the buttons board, and it should just come loose quite easily. I left the right hand side jumper until after I'd undone the screws because it was slightly easier to get it off like that. So the next thing I needed to do was desolder the volume pot. The way I usually do this is I cut the legs off so that you can take the pot off and then desolder each leg individually. Sometimes you have to hold on to the leg with some tweezers to just pull it out as you desolder it, but I found this is usually a pretty good way to desolder stuff. So then it was just a case of soldering the new pot into the place of the old one. So with the pot desoldered, I needed to also desolder the left cursor button. So I went through the same thing, just undoing the screws and using a knife and a screwdriver to get out the jumper cables. It was pretty easy to get out, and the cursor keys came off really easily, so no problems there. I used the same technique to desolder this, just cutting as many of the legs as I could. I couldn't get to the last leg, but as it was only one, I just desoldered that from the other side and the button came off quite easily. And then I just desoldered the legs like I did before. Just to be sure that I wasn't soldering in another faulty button, I checked the tactile switch was definitely working with a multimeter. Then I soldered it in, and once I'd soldered it in, I checked it again with the multimeter just to be sure. I then just hoovered up the pads and the front panel because they were a bit covered in dust. Obviously hadn't been used for a while, so I just thought I'd give them a bit of a clean and a wipe. And yeah, then it was just a case of putting it back together, putting all the jumper cables back in, all the screws back in, and then putting the top back on and putting in all the outer screws as well, which once you've taken it apart is actually quite easy to do. So yeah, that was done quite quickly. So I've finished all the fixes with at least some success. The left cursor button's working fine now, that was the important thing, so I can navigate all the menus fine with that. Again, now it's just changing the button. Unfortunately, the volume is still stuck on full. That's not as much of an issue because I'm always going to be running it into a mixer or an interface. But yeah, it's something I'll have to look into in the future to work out what's wrong with it. I imagine it's something fairly obvious. If anyone's had one of these before, has any ideas what it could be, let me know in the comments. It might save me a bit of time. But yeah, it's all usable now, so I can get to learning how to use it. At the moment it's got this tiny knob on it because it was the only D-shaft knob I had. I might swap the pot out for one with a shorter shaft again, or I think what I'll probably do is just get a D-shaft knob that fits it that doesn't have a skirt and it can sit slightly higher, and I think that'd be fine. So yeah, hopefully I can work out what the volume issue is, but it's not a massive issue if I can't, and I'm excited to start trying to make some music on this. It's worth subscribing if you're interested in MPCs or modular synths or anything to do with synthesizers, guitars, DIY, stuff like that, because I'll be doing more and more videos about this and similar things. So yeah, thanks for watching.